I feel like I probably know the answer to this, but is wrestling like the mafia? Like as soon as you think you're out, you get pulled back in? Because you said you're kind of reconnecting. So,
I don't think you're ever out, really. You already, like I was a longshoreman for 25 years. I started that after, long after 20 years in the business, and I still feel like I'm, at times, I'm still kind of feel like I was a wrestler, ex wrestler, or something, and as for longshoreman, just retiree. So yeah,
nice.
I don't think you ever really escape the business. Once it gets in your blood, it pretty much stays there.
Do you have like a favorite period of your career? Because, you're all over the territories, Mid-Atlantic, Georgia, um, obviously WWF in that golden era in the mid 80s. Do you have like a favorite time in your career?
A couple runs in Florida, I had a good time, and we made some. When I was with Curtis and Sonny King, Joe LeDuc, and that crew there at Heels, we were making some pretty good bucks, and it was a really good crew. And naturally, WWF, of course, because of the bread, but that led to a lot of heartaches and a lot of mental anguish. But that's still, yeah.
Well, you say like the heartache and mental anguish from what? Like the constant travel or how you were booked or like what really got to you working there?
All of the above. The travel, everybody no home. Like everybody has that kind of problem, you know. And I miss the money. Naturally I think everybody else missed the paydays. So that was that's a big part of it. But the creativity and the difference in different places, as I transitioned the business, and I was really lucky. I guess lucky because I got in with the old timers as an old timer, and then when I went to I'll just say WWF from now on. Then when went there, it was still, still Cicluna and Altamori and those guys, and the new, and then and Junior took over. It went to the new. Slowly, it gradually, took on the new format. So that was a learning experience.
You were always like one of the best heels I ever saw. I never got to really see your babyface run until later, but like from your stuff from Florida to Georgia and being on that national level, I mean that whole stuff that you just did, like you were just next level heel. Was that like the role that you liked the best as being the bad guy?
Yeah, unquestionably.
Watching you and your work, like you were so pretty much ahead of the times as a wrestler as well. Like I remember the opening of the WWF program, you jumping off the top rope. The only other guy I saw do that was Jimmy Snuka, but you were doing it before Snuka in the WWF. And then also like your innovativeness with moves like your pile driver, which is now the Undertaker's tombstone. You're doing all this stuff that when not a lot of guys were doing that. Like, was that just stuff that you thought on the fly or saw somebody else do it? Or I mean, you're such a natural athlete, you really were.
Stuff I picked up, and some of it I guess maybe I invented that pile driver. I learned from Lucha Libre over in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
They had Black Cat, the green something, Pero Goyo, the
Right.
three Mexican guys on the tour,
Yes.
and in Japan, you go in the ring before the matches, and the Japanese guys get their hour to work out, and the American or the Gaijin going for a little while. And I was watching that, and the Lucha Libre guys, that Tombstone thing. They did a similar version, not exactly the same, but they did I kind of picked it up from there.
And I got a lot of questions, especially about the early 80s with you, but going back to like when Vince McMahon Jr. took over, like for me as a fan, it was hard because it became very cartoonish for me and it kind of turned me off. But for you, I'm sure it was great because how much money was coming in. But was that a tough transition? Like, I we just Tommy and I were talking about Gorilla Monsoon earlier, and how a lot of people thought that Gorilla Monsoon was going to take over the WWF, and it was Vince Jr. What was that? What was that period like for you creatively, but also business wise?
At first, it wasn't a big change, and eventually it grew to that kind of tedious. Um, you're working with the same guy night after night because your performance venues are so varied. You're traveling, so you're just like married to Pedro or Steamboat or whoever it happened to be. So I when at first when you got in, you're still on the fly, still creating, still learning, still teaching yourself and learning from other guys and going through the matches, and then I don't, maybe Tommy can speak to this as you're there, and it got into that it progressed, I guess call it progressed into that 2 or 3 years after, where you're the same guy, same thing, the cartoonish aspect like that you call it. Then it got a little, yeah, it became a little tedious, or a lot tedious.
The Man, I got so many stories too. But just like for I guess the biggest match of like a lot of people's uh noted is you and Jimmy Snuka and the dive off the top of the cage. Like everyone knows, Mick Foley was there. Another one of our co-hosts, Bully Ray, was there. I was there. Another wrestler named Little Guido was there. Tom Brandy was there. And like we all, as fans, paid money to see you work. And it's the only time I've ever heard like all these guys who then made it as wrestlers came to see one specific match. And I just think that's just a testament of how great you were as the heel that we were. It was my father's money that was paying for those tickets. But um, with all that being said, did you think in that moment, like this match would be such historic and still it's on the opening of the show today?
I don't know if I had thought that deeply about it. It was kind of to the point where we were making a type of history, but I didn't, how you're moving there
Yeah.
so fast. Garden one night, Pittsburgh just, up and down so it didn't mentally have that, effect. It was a great, it was a really satisfying accomplishment, but it didn't seem like the end of the road, especially when I was right in the middle of the Intercontinental thing and some other stuff going on. So I was, it didn't seem like, the end of the road or the be all end all of, of my career. So yeah, maybe I didn't have the impact. I didn't realize the impact that it had on the public, so to speak, or
Right.
long lastly. But yeah, I enjoyed it. Jimmy was over like
Yeah.
nobody's business.
It's funny because when you talk about it, like when Tommy brings that up, people forget it wasn't the main event that night. Like, I would say that the match that really sold out the Garden that night was you and Snuka in a cage, but it wasn't the main event. It was Backlund and Mass Superstar. And were you surprised that they didn't make the move to put the Intercontinental title on Snuka? You just said like he was the most over wrestler at that period. Were you surprised that there wasn't a title change that night?
No, they were afraid of Jimmy. He was he was volatile. The shit happens.
Yeah.
They say. And Vince told me ahead of time. Can you figure out a finish where you can keep the belt? And I said, well, what they really want to see is him coming out the top of the cage. So it's yeah. No, I wasn't surprised. Jimmy was Jimmy was very explosive, real dynamic, and then Hulk came and his whole attitude really switched.
If somebody never saw one of your matches, what match would you say was defined what your body of work as Don Muraco?
Probably back to Florida days, I suppose. some of those. Well, Jack Briscoe's were baby face. Ivan Koloff. Ivan
Oh,
Koloff.
wow, yeah.
When I was a baby face, and Ivan, I had a cage match with him in St. Petersburg, the Bayfront, and Ivan, he was just, he was a dream. He was so talented, so gifted. That when the movement and when all the spots and everything were going at that time, and the thought pattern, the thought process was really working then. When you weren't, when I wasn't, you're caught in a routine or a rut like you got afterward,
Right.
or stuck with the, big picture. Look at Vince had.
I'm currently watching early WWF 1982, 83, the beach bum gimmick. Like, if you really think about, like, you were living a great life. You're surfing, you're hanging out on the beach, and yet people are healing you as the beach bum. Like, it's perhaps the stupidest chant, but yet you made a lot of money being called a beach bum. Like, I didn't understand the heat.
That was a godsend. Nobody planned on it. Nobody had any idea. It wasn't, or it just happened. So I
Really?
guess my promos would lead to, I would giving surfing promos and, Hawaii and my greatness here and, in the islands and stuff like that. And I didn't, I don't think anyone, no one intended to come up with that beach bum thing, but it did, and I just wrote it as far as I could.
I think a lot of people credit Jake the Snake for his different style of promos, and he would talk and not always yell. But I go back and I'm like, you again were doing that way ahead, both as a heel and as a babyface. When you were a heel, I've just watched you and Vince McMahon sitting in the locker room, and you're talking about your match with Pedro, and you're just telling this nice, and then you always would kind of explode towards the end. Was that a style you just came up with, or you're just being like this conversational?
It was a feeling, that you'd go as you went down the, you maybe don't remember, but we, go to Hamburg and Allentown and stuff, and sometimes you'd go three matches better, three shows back from going to Pittsburgh, 3 weeks from now, and I got this Saturday, next Saturday, and then tonight Saturday that I'm facing you. I'm coming for you tonight, but the previous two, depending on how I felt and what was going on, and I might be pissed off, or I might be a wise guy, or I might be arrogant, and then come down to the night of the content of the show, then I might have just a more focus on the individual. But you could play it. You still have to think about back in those days, you had to think about your promos.
You didn't have a writer.
Yeah, you didn't have writers and you didn't have the other stuff. So you kind of have to engage gauge your performances and gauge the promos and gauge what was going on. You didn't want to give them screaming every week, scream. You'd have to go up, want to be a prick, be a good guy, be arrogant, be something, and then, maybe finally blow it off,
Right.
Well, if you're pissed off, I could probably figure out why. I've been to the Hamburg Field House. How did all you guys change in that one little tiny bathroom in that place?
Well, we had heels and baby faces. Everybody had their own side. There were two different sides. And the concession stand was on the other side of the building.
I mean, I don't know if you've ever gone there since, but it still stands and it looks exactly the way it did in 1983. It has not changed at all.
That's great.
Yo, earlier on, you talked about when Hogan came in and you said his attitude changed. What, did Vince McMahon's attitude change, or did Snuka's attitude change when Hogan came in?
Everybody's all of the above. I don't know. Hogan, he was like the first guy when he, Piper, Dusty, there were a handful of guys like that. They were out for themselves, and it wasn't a bad thing, but it was a new idea, new direction in the business, where most of the guys, Orton and myself and a lot of the other guys, we were really surrogates of of the promotion, and would go along and didn't have the ability to, think out, think of program ahead of this, or but these guys have the opportunities to. Hogan came in. I kind of wanted to just. Hogan came in and he was what they had, the 6'6", blonde hair, muscles, good size, that Hollywood body, that Hollywood, and his promos and everything. So like when he started with us, like he was a good guy. I mean, he was aloof. He came from a musical background, so I don't know if that was part of the, where they would bicker over money and what songs I'm going to play, or what music, or what direction I'm going to go. But he had kind of had a different attitude, even after getting stretched by Matsuda and those guys in Tampa. He came in with a different program in his mind, but it was Vince leading the charge, and he was able to carry it, and they blended they melded real well together mentally, for the first few years that I was there.
I mean, and it took the business to another level, but Snuka at that point must have known he was done, like, because as hot as he was, he must have figured like his time was over, right?
Well, no. I don't think he was able to see that far,
Right.
past his, see the forest between the trees, as such. It's when you're as high as he is, it's hard. I was supposed, even myself, all the guys, it's hard to envision, you getting knocked down, which he never did. He knocked himself down, but it's hard to envision, when you're as hot as he was. I think it would be hard to imagine that, that Hulk is going to come and Hulk's going to get everything, and everybody else is going to be secondary to Hulk, which it was actually basically run like every other territory, but with the organization and the TVs and the interviews and everything else just pointed towards one guy, one guy carrying the load, with Vince calling all the shots. I didn't. I guess, he was hard to deal with afterwards, and he started dealing his, calling his own shots, or having a lot of input into what he did. But we were still, subject to the promotion. It was a war. It was a war when we came in, from Florida, Georgia, San Francisco, Shires, all those promoters. It was always a war. Nick Goulas, to get money, to get paid, to get booking, and your opinion, your attitude toward promoters was totally different. You were the boys. The boys were together. The boys were a group together. Then there was a promotion that was, just stepping on you and keeping you down. Like these guys that came, not the Rock and Stone Cold, and they had so much opportunity and were given so much, and were able to the leeway of doing so many things, that shooting the milk, the beer in the ring, and riding the motorcycles, and the four-wheel drivers, and all that kind of stuff around, and they carry, and rock and stuff. They were able to carry those 10, 12, 15-minute promos, but they were given the opportunity to do so, and it was the business had morphed into that type of platform anyway.
Dave, like I always said, it was always like the boys versus the office, or the boys versus
Exactly.
promoters. Like Don said, fighting for your money, or they could blackball you if you did something, and hey, don't book this guy, and then your options for work was just completely different. It was, again, a totally different time and era.
When I came in, they could give you a 2-week notice. You could have your family, everything else, moved into Portland or San Francisco, everything, and we're done. You got 2 weeks, and we're done. Your bookings are over, and you're sitting there. What's that? What the hell? So that was, ancient times, but it still was the reality.
All right, so for you, it's 1987, it's WrestleMania 3. You've gone through all the wars with promoters and all the different territories. And then in the opening contest, you're standing in the ring with 93,000 fans in attendance. Like in that moment, because like Tommy asked you about, the match with Snuka at Madison Square Garden. Let's say, the WWF would sell out the Garden every month, but it's a different story when you're talking about being around 93,000 fans.
Yeah.
What was that moment like for you? And in that moment, did you know, man, this company is the sky's the limit right now?
Yeah. That was a oh wow moment. It was, hey, it's just looking around at because the Silver Dome there where we're at, you could basically see the guys in the top row or the top deck, and you could, it's the seating and everything, regardless of what the actual crowd was, it was enormous, and it was really, it was impressive.
I guess, I would think this is the last run in WWE with you and superstar Billy Graham. Billy Graham, gets hurt. He was your manager, and you're like, getting ovations of top 2 to 3 baby faces. You were lean, but also jacked. And then all of a sudden you just disappeared. Like, what happened to your exit from WWE? Because I just never understood. I was like, because again, I was a big fan, but then like you're here and then all of a sudden you're gone.
I got into beef with Buckwinkle in Europe, and
Agent.
he goes way back to Minneapolis when I was there. His brother was a ring crew, Dennis. He and Dennis Stamp had the ring crew, and they were the only guys my age. Or Larry Henning, all the other guys. They were all, all old with all the guys were old with families. I was 22, 23 years old. So the two Dennises, they had the ring. So no, but Dennis, he died of an overdose. He was a stone cold junkie. So Nick just assumed, and I've had this problem with my family. And Nick just assumed I was, I was on the same boat as he was, shooting up or whatever, and stuff like that. So I think he looked at me in the same light as Dennis. And Dennis said, I got back from Japan or something. I was in LA one day. I called the house and I was, is Dennis there? And he said, oh, Dennis isn't here anymore. I said, well, he's not coming back. He passed away. So I think that's Nick kind of had a hard on for me, and that from that aspect, because I used to take him out to surf from the car and stuff
Right.
from Lord Blears and stuff, and to show him where to line up and bigger surf too, and how to different things, how to stay safe and catch waves and stuff. We weren't friends by any means, but he and Tally Ho were real close. So I came, and then when he came there in Minneapolis, and I was there as a young guy, I think he just got that. So when he came in, I think he just didn't care for me. He had that
Well,
hate thing.
I didn't know what was his position in WWE. You talking like he came in? I thought he was just like an on air, but he was
He was an
backstage.
agent. He started as an agent.
Oh, okay.
That's where he got the name Captain Pecker Checker. We used to, when we just used to do the piss test and the
Yes.
random, and he'd get down there and the Bulldog came up with that name for him. Hey, Captain Pecker Checker.
Awesome. Listen, thank you for giving us so much time. It was great catching up with you. We got to do it again, and we appreciate and thank you so much for everything you've done for the business. Your career is still looked upon as one of the greats. You're a Hall of Famer, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning.
Well, thank you. I love the business. I had a great time in the business. Loved a lot of it. Spent some bad times. Still feel like one of the boys, and still still have the back of the boys. I still feel like I have a real bond with the wrestlers and stuff. Although nowadays they are certainly a lot different.
All right, Don Muraco, thank you so much, sir.
No problem. Thank you. Aloha.